Jim, this question for the late night drive-thru comes in from W. Mullins. Jim, in terms of the NWA champion going into territories to wrestle the top star, do you think it made a difference who the actual champion was? Or did the belt draw on its own regardless of the person holding it?
Well, it depended on the territory, to be honest with you. Harley Race in places like the Central States and St. Louis and places that in the Midwest, places that he had wrestled regularly and later in the Carolinas, I think, as well, or the Funks. It depended on whether they had a history in that territory. So I think the NWA World Champion, the idea of the belt itself drew more when it came to the Tennessee territory when it was held by Harley Race, because Harley Race had never wrestled. Well, he 20 years before or whatever, when he wasn't even using that name. He'd been in Tennessee as a rookie. But then again, if it was a place like St. Louis, Harley Race just heaped prestige on the NWA title when he had it because people already knew how good he was. So I think it would depend on, that's why when they groomed champions that they wanted to hold the belt long term, they sent them to all the top NWA territories on a regular basis. Before Jack Briscoe got the belt, he was exposed in St. Louis and in Georgia and out west, and like Leroy McGurk had used him. He had been to a lot of different territories. So the people were familiar with him, especially, and obviously his home base was Florida because Eddie Graham was his promoter. And when the Funks, they toured everywhere. The Funks were in Los Angeles a lot in the early 70s. They were all over, obviously, Texas and the Southwest, Florida, Georgia. They made shots in the Carolinas. But whenever they would be planning on putting the belt on a guy long term, they get him to as many of the top territories as possible. But in some cases, places that didn't get world title matches often, especially once again, except for Memphis, most of the Tennessee territory, sometimes it was just the idea of the champion coming to town.
As a fan, were there NWA champions you wanted to see, and were there NWA champions you didn't want to see?
For the NWA champions for the entirety that I was a fan before I got into business were Dory Funk Jr., Harley Race, Jack Briscoe, and not counting Giant Baba, okay? I wasn't going to go to Japan regardless. Jack Briscoe, Terry Funk, then Harley Race again, right? Then Flair and Dusty, and then I was in the business. So, yes, I always wanted to see those guys. And in some cases, I'd seen Dusty before he was NWA champion in Memphis and in Atlanta. I had seen Jack Briscoe. He was the first guy that brought the NWA title here to wrestle Lawler. So I'd seen him on TV from Memphis before I got to see him live here in Louisville. But yeah, there was always, because you thought, wow, if I like all these great wrestlers that I see every week, and this guy's the world champion and he's such a hot shot, he only comes in here a time or two a year. My God, he's got to be insane. He'd be incredible. And fortunately, guys like Harley Race lived. I remember Harley Race worked with Rocky Johnson. And even though Rocky Johnson was a great worker, I said, wow, after this, the best match I've ever seen Rocky Johnson have. And after I saw Terry Funk, blow the fucking star rating scale up with Lawler and et cetera, those guys could carry that. Now, I will admit, Jack Briscoe versus Steve Kovac in 1975 just didn't thrill me as Jack Briscoe was a great wrestler, but Steve Kovac got a lot of fucking world title shots for a babyface not named Lawler in the Tennessee territory back in the mid-70s. And they were all kind of the same.
But to this question of if the NWA champion was the draw or the individual holding the belt, let's look at the Jerry Lawler run to the title where he had the match with Briscoe. Would anyone have fit into that spot and it would have drawn the same house? Would Gene Kiniski a few years earlier, or Dory Funk Jr., or anyone who was NWA champion fit right into that spot?
In that case, yes. Because the match would probably not have been what they wanted. I think Kiniski would have probably been too careful with himself to do what they did with Briscoe. And I think Lawler and Briscoe always meshed better than Lawler and Dory. And Lawler and Terry is better than all of them. But anyway, no, it was the idea of Lawler going for the world title. So in that case, whoever the world champion was, because a lot of people forget, especially Lawler sold out with the Sheik. They had 7 sellouts that summer, I believe. And Lawler sold out with the Sheik. And Lawler sold out with Jackie Fargo 2 or 3 times. And Lawler sold out with another one of the top 10 contenders. But because they raised the ticket prices when Briscoe came to defend the world title, it was also right before back to school. So they made a mistake and they raised the ticket prices like $2 for front row and $1 across the board or whatever. And they only drew like 10,200 people. They didn't sell out. Only, right? They did 400,000 tickets that year. But that was a quest for the world title, whoever held it. But other times, I mean, obviously, especially the Funks, when they would go back to Texas or go back to the Florida territory as world champion, where they were, and it being Dory Funk Jr. being the world champion when Jack Briscoe became the top babyface in Florida and became the challenger, those matches wouldn't have drawn anywhere near what they did with any other NWA world champion. It had to be Dory Funk Jr. because that was like the Flair and Steamboat. Right? Anything else wouldn't have clicked like that. And they took that everywhere. So that was a case of the guy that was the champion meaning more. And sometimes when you have the local territory quest, it's just the idea of whoever the world champion is coming in against the local hero. And probably that drew more often than not.
I can think of examples like Terry Funk or even Ric Flair, who, whether they had the belt or not, it seemed to me it didn't affect their drawing power at all. But do you think someone like Dory Funk Jr. lost a step without the belt in terms of his appeal to most wrestling fans? You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, well, I mean, but the thing is, Dory's career after he was the champion was really different because when he went from, he was in Japan so much of the year, and also because he was booker in a lot of places when he went in. He wasn't featured as the singles guy in a territory comparable to when he was the singles guy in the world. So I don't know. I mean, Dory was never a fireball personality, but just technically just so good and just grinds you down in that, the old fashioned way. But I think he always kind of had that legend emeritus status where he was always kind of over because of who he was.